candidata a la dirigencia F1 para que trasladen al compañero que lleva la llave.
July 26, 2023, Niamey, Niger. The presidential guard surrounds the palace. President Mohamed Bazoum, democratically elected, Western-backed, France-approved, is placed under house arrest before the morning is over. And the man who orders it is not a rebel, not a warlord, not a stranger to the palace walls. He is the commander of the very guard sworn to protect it. General Abdourahamane Tchiani steps in front of the cameras, calm, deliberate, unhurried, the kind of calm that only belongs to a man who has been preparing for this moment far longer than anyone in that palace suspected, and with the quiet authority of someone who has already calculated every consequence and accepted every risk, he announces that Niger belongs to Niger now. Paris chokes on its morning coffee. Washington makes frantic phone calls that nobody picks up. ECONWS schedules an emergency meeting that will ultimately change nothing. And 50 million Nigerians, people who have watched their uranium power French cities while their own children study under broken lights, take to the streets, not in protest, in celebration. The West calls it a coup. 50 million Nigerians call it something else entirely. They call it the beginning. To understand what happens next, you need to understand what Niger has been living with for 60 years, since independence from France in 1960. This vast landlocked nation, sitting on some of the richest uranium deposits on the entire planet, has supplied the fuel that powers French homes, French hospitals, French industry, and the French nuclear weapons that Paris waves at the world as proof of its great power status. In return, Niger receives poverty, not metaphorical poverty, not the kind of poverty that development reports describe in careful diplomatic language designed not to offend the people responsible for it. Documented, measurable, generational, catastrophic poverty that makes Niger consistently rank among the bottom 5 nations on earth by GDP per capita, despite sitting on mineral wealth that has powered an entire European nation's energy grid for half a century. Let that sink in completely. The country that supplies France's nuclear fuel cannot reliably supply its own children with electricity. The French company Orano, formerly known as Areva, has operated Niger's uranium mines for 50 years. 50 years of extraction, 50 years of profit leaving the country on planes and in contracts and in financial arrangements so complex that no Nigerian government ever fully understood what it was signing. 50 years of a relationship that called itself partnership while functioning as something that any honest historian would recognize by a much older and much uglier name. And this arrangement has only been possible because every Nigerian government that tried to renegotiate it, every president who asked uncomfortable questions about the terms, every minister who suggested that Niger deserved more from its own resources, found themselves facing sudden political instability, diplomatic pressure, and the quiet withdrawal of French support that kept them in power. The system was self-reinforcing. Dependency maintained dependency. Poverty prevented the accumulation of the political capital needed to challenge poverty until General Tchiani, until one military leader decided that being removed from his post was less terrifying than spending another decade watching his country be emptied from beneath its feet. And with that decision, made in the pre-dawn hours of July 26, 2023, everything changes. The reaction from the West is immediate, overwhelming, and deeply revealing. KWAS, the regional bloc that has historically performed France's diplomatic work in West Africa with the loyalty of an institution that understands exactly whose interests keep it funded, threatens military intervention, not negotiation, not dialogue. Military intervention against a landlocked nation of subsistence farmers in the name of restoring a democracy that the same bloc has never shown equivalent urgency to protect anywhere else in the region. Sanctions are imposed within days. Niger's access to international financial systems is squeezed with a precision and a speed that tells you everything about where the real pressure is coming from. Borders are closed. The economic vice tightens around a population that was already among the poorest on earth, being punished collectively for the decision of one military leader to stop the bleeding. Think about the timeline carefully. Niger announces General Tchiani's leadership on July 26. Within 72 hours, the same Western governments that watched Niger rank last on human development indices for 60 years without meaningful intervention are suddenly, urgently, vocally concerned about Nigerian democracy. Not Nigerian uranium, Nigerian democracy. The mask does not slip gradually. It falls off completely. But General Tchiani does not blink. He does not negotiate from fear. He does not offer concessions designed to make the pressure stop. He does what every sovereign leader of a genuinely independent nation would do. He looks at the pressure being applied and concludes that the source of that pressure is precisely the problem he set out to solve. Niger joins the Alliance of Sahel States alongside Mali and Burkina Faso, three military-led governments, three nations that have each, through their own paths and their own particular forms of suffering, arrived at the same conclusion, that the price of Western partnership is sovereignty itself, that the development promised in exchange for compliance has never arrived and will never arrive, and that the only way forward is through the discomfort of genuine independence, with all the hostility that independence from this particular system inevitably attracts. Then comes the move that shakes Paris to its absolute foundations. In 2024, General Tchiani's military government revokes Orano's operating license for Imouraren, one of the largest uranium deposits on the entire planet, a deposit so significant that its full development would make Niger one of the most important uranium producers in the world. 50 years of French nuclear privilege cancelled. With a document, with a government decision, with the stroke of a pen wielded by people who were told for generations that they did not have the right to make decisions about their own earth. Orano calls it theft. Niger calls it justice, and the world holds its breath waiting to see what France does next. Here is what the Western media does not tell you. Here is the number they do not put in the headlines. When France loses Niger's uranium, it does not just lose a mining contract in a poor African country. It does not just lose a business arrangement that can be replaced with a phone call to another supplier. It loses approximately 5% of its entire global uranium supply. The supply that keeps its 56 nuclear reactors running, the supply that keeps French hospitals lit, French trains moving, French cities warm through European winters, the supply that has quietly, invisibly, and completely without acknowledgement in any French political speech underpinned French energy independence. For 5 decades, France has been the one living on Niger's resources all along. Niger has simply decided to stop subsidizing a former colonial master while its own children grow up in darkness. And the geopolitical consequences of that decision ripple outward in ways that European strategic planners are only beginning to fully calculate. Russia moves in, not with the conditions and the cultural humiliation and the quiet assumption of permanent African inferiority that characterized 50 years of French presence, with uranium cooperation agreements, with security partnerships, with the kind of transactional respect that says, we want your resources and we will pay a fair price for them, which is so different from what Niger has experienced that it feels to many Nigerians almost incomprehensible. China deepens its existing oil partnerships. Algeria tightens its security cooperation along the shared northern border. The Trans-Saharan gas pipeline, delayed for decades by the political calculation that a dependent Niger was more useful than a prosperous one, is being revived with new urgency. One decision, one military leader who refused to go quietly, and the architecture of French influence in the Sahel, built across 60 years, maintained through political manipulation, economic dependency, and occasional military intervention, begins coming apart at every seam simultaneously. But the enemies of Niger's sovereignty are not finished. They are never finished. January 2026. Islamic State affiliates launch a major assault on Abdourahamane International Airport in Niamey, Niger's most strategically important installation, the former base of both American and French military forces and the logistical heart of the AES security architecture in the country. Significant casualties, significant damage, a direct, deliberate strike at the physical infrastructure of the Nigerian state designed to demonstrate that Niger's military government cannot protect what it claims to govern. Niger's military leadership points fingers at France, Benin, and Côte d'Ivoire. The accusations are fierce. The geopolitical temperature rises to levels that make regional neighbors visibly uncomfortable. And then, June 2026, JNIM, the Al-Qaeda affiliate that coordinated the April 25th massacres in Mali, hits Niamey airport again. Soldiers and civilians die. Militants attempt to breach the terminal itself. 2 major airport attacks in 6 months. This is not insurgency. This is not random violence born of ideology and desperation. This is a campaign, a coordinated, sustained, externally resourced campaign designed to demonstrate that Niger's military government is incapable of governing and therefore incapable of managing its own uranium, its own oil, its own future. It is the same playbook being run simultaneously against Mali and Burkina Faso, against every African military government that has dared to choose sovereignty over dependency. Destabilize, discredit, reinsert. General Tchiani sees it clearly. Niger's armed forces see it clearly. And despite the attacks, despite the sanctions, despite the airport assaults and the border closures and the financial strangulation, Niger is still standing, still sovereign, still refusing. General Tchiani is sworn in as transitional president in March 2025 under a new national charter that gives Niger's military leadership a 5-year mandate to rebuild the country on its own terms. The uranium stays in Nigerian hands. Russian firms are invited for cooperation on terms that Niger negotiates as an equal. Algeria deepens its partnership across security, energy, and infrastructure. The Trans-Saharan gas pipeline moves toward reality. Niger's oil production, with the potential to exceed 100,000 barrels per day through the pipeline to Benin, represents an economic future that no previous Nigerian government was ever allowed to fully develop. 60 years of manufactured dependency are being dismantled, not by international pressure, not by foreign aid, not by the approval of the same institutions that engineered the dependency in the first place, by Nigerians, led by their military. For Niger, the West calls General Tchiani illegitimate. But the uranium mines are finally, for the first time in 50 years, in the hands of the people who live above them. The oil revenues are finally being negotiated by leaders who are not pre-approved by Paris. The security partnerships are finally being chosen by a government that answers to its own population rather than to foreign capitals. History will decide who was right. The Sahel already knows. And 50 million Nigerians, the ones who took to the streets in celebration on July 26, 2023, they knew first. They knew before the cameras arrived, before the sanctions were announced, before ECOWAS held its emergency meeting, before Washington made its frantic phone calls. They knew because they had been living the truth of what Niger was, and they recognized in that one calm general standing in front of those cameras the first credible promise of what Niger could become. General Tchiani did not give Niger its resources back. He gave Niger the courage to take them. Like this video, subscribe to the Sahel Bulletin. Share this with every African who deserves to know what is really happening in our Sahel. Because Niger's story is Africa's story, and we will never stop telling it